In 1956, the first Ferguson FE35 rolled off the production line in Coventry, England, carrying serial number 1001. The following year, it was rebranded as the Massey-Ferguson 35 after the merger was fully realized. The Massey-Ferguson 35 wasn't just another piece of farm equipment. It was the machine that would help feed the planet. By the time production ended, 388,000 MF-35s had been built across 4 continents, making it one of the most successful tractors in history. This was the company that mechanized agriculture, from the Canadian prairies to the African savanna. Massey-Ferguson didn't just build tractors, they built an empire. At their peak, they employed over 70,000 people across dozens of factories on 6 continents. They held patents on revolutionary hydraulic systems that transformed agriculture. But the powerhouse that once owned a quarter of the global tractor market didn't just vanish, it surrendered its independence. So what happened to the agricultural giant that fed the world? The story starts in 1847 with Daniel Massey, a blacksmith's son who opened a small foundry in Newcastle, Ontario. Massey wasn't trying to build an empire. He was solving a problem that was breaking farmers' backs across North America. While wealthy landowners could afford the expensive mechanical reapers imported from the United States, ordinary farmers were still cutting grain by hand with scythes and sickles. Massey's first reaper changed everything. Priced at $120, it cost nearly half what American competitors charged. But Daniel Massey understood something revolutionary. The machine was only part of the solution. Farmers needed credit to buy equipment in spring and pay after harvest. They needed parts when something broke during the critical harvest season. They needed someone who understood their business. So Massey created the first comprehensive agricultural dealer network in Canada. His agents weren't just salesmen, they were mechanics, financiers, and advisors. They carried spare parts, offered repair services, and provided payment plans that let farmers buy equipment without risking their farms. Within a decade, Massey Manufacturing was producing 1,500 machines annually and had dealers from Ontario to Manitoba. The company's growth was relentless. In 1870, they introduced the Sharps rake, a horse-drawn implement that could gather cut grain faster than a dozen men with hand rakes. The Toronto light binder, launched in 1881, could cut and tie grain into bundles automatically. Each innovation made farming more efficient and profitable. By 1891, Massey Manufacturing had merged with A. Harris, Son and Company to form Massey-Harris, creating the largest agricultural equipment manufacturer in the British Empire. The new company dominated the Canadian market and was exporting to Argentina, Australia, and South Africa. Their factory in Toronto employed 2,400 workers and covered 40 acres. But the real transformation came in 1953 when Massey-Harris merged with Ferguson, a small British company run by an obsessive Irish engineer named Harry Ferguson. Ferguson had spent 20 years perfecting something that would revolutionize farming, the 3-point hitch system. Before Ferguson's innovation, implements were simply dragged behind tractors like dead weight. His hydraulic 3-point hitch made the implement and tractor work as one integrated unit. The system automatically adjusted to ground conditions, transferred weight to improve traction, and allowed precise control of implement depth. A small tractor equipped with Ferguson's system could suddenly do the work of a much larger machine. The merger created Massey-Ferguson, and Harry Ferguson's hydraulic system became standard on every tractor they built. Ferguson himself was a perfectionist who tested prototypes for thousands of hours, often driving them personally across the rough terrain of his Irish farm. He insisted that every component be designed for easy maintenance by farmers themselves, not just trained mechanics. The company's mission crystallized: make mechanization affordable and accessible for ordinary farmers worldwide, not just wealthy landowners.
Mr. Ferguson, will this machine be a success for the small farmer?
Yes, it is deliberately planned to be a success on the small farm. We'll do all the work that animals do on the farm at less than half the cost.
This philosophy would drive everything they did for the next 3 decades. The 1950s and 1960s belonged to Massey-Ferguson, while competitors like John Deere and International Harvester focused primarily on their home markets. MF was building a truly global empire. The company operated numerous factories across 6 continents, from Detroit to São Paulo, and from Coventry to Nairobi. The MF-35 became the backbone of worldwide expansion. At 35 horsepower, it was perfectly sized for the small to medium farms that dominated agriculture globally. But the real genius was in its design philosophy. The MF-35 was engineered to be manufactured anywhere using local suppliers and adapted to local conditions. This wasn't just about saving shipping costs, it was about understanding that farmers in different regions had vastly different needs. The MF-35 could be locally adapted, with options like heavy-duty air filters for dusty conditions in regions of Africa. The version built in Argentina featured a different transmission, optimized for working in flooded rice paddies. The French model had a narrower wheelbase specifically for vineyard work between tight rows. At its peak, Coventry's Banner Lane plant employed over 6,000 workers, and in 1961 the line was dispatching a finished tractor roughly every 2.25 minutes to meet global demand. Workers specialized in specific tasks. One team installed engines, another fitted hydraulic systems, a third mounted the distinctive red sheet metal that became MF's signature. By 1965, Massey-Ferguson controlled 25% of the global tractor market. In the United Kingdom, they held 40% market share. In Australia, it was 35%. They were the largest tractor manufacturer in South America and dominated markets across Africa and Asia. Their dealer network included 18,000 locations worldwide, more than McDonald's restaurants today. The numbers were staggering. In the mid-1960s, MF was among the world's leading tractor producers, with annual output sometimes exceeding 100,000 machines. The company employed 72,000 people and generated revenues of $1.2 billion, equivalent to over $10 billion in today's money. But Massey-Ferguson wasn't just about tractors. They built the MF-300 combine harvester that could handle wheat in Saskatchewan and rice in Thailand with equal efficiency. Their 124 baler could work in the hay fields of Wisconsin or the alfalfa farms of Argentina. They manufactured Perkins diesel engines that powered not just their own equipment, but irrigation pumps, generators, and industrial machinery worldwide. The MF-1100 and MF-1130, launched in 1965, represented the pinnacle of the company's engineering capabilities. These were among the first tractors in the range to offer power outputs around 100 horsepower. The MF-1130's Perkins 6 354 turbocharged diesel was paired with a 12 forward 4 reverse multi-power transmission for on-the-go shifting. In 1972, Massey-Ferguson introduced the MF-1200, an articulated tractor rated at about 105 horsepower for large-scale farming. It built on familiar multi-power transmission technology to allow shifting between ranges without clutching, and the cab design featured improved sound dampening for better operator comfort. The company's commitment to innovation was reflected in their research and development budget, which reached $50 million annually by 1975. They operated test facilities in Arizona's desert heat, Argentina's humid pampas, and Australia's dusty outback, putting prototypes through millions of hours of field testing before production. Their engineers held over 2,000 patents, covering everything from hydraulic valve design to transmission metallurgy. MF's global reach extended beyond manufacturing. They established agricultural colleges in developing countries, training farmers in modern techniques. Their financing division provided loans not just for equipment, but for land improvement and crop development. In Brazil, MF helped establish the soybean industry that would eventually make the country a major agricultural exporter. The company's tractors contributed to the mechanization of farming in countries where animal traction had dominated for centuries and supported increased productivity during the Green Revolution. The first signs of trouble appeared in 1973, though few recognized them at the time. The oil crisis sent fuel prices soaring, but it also triggered a commodity boom that made farmers wealthy overnight. Wheat prices doubled, corn hit record highs, and soybeans reached levels not seen since World War II. Farmers rushed to buy bigger tractors and more equipment, and Massey-Ferguson was eager to meet that demand. But the company was making a critical strategic error. While competitors like John Deere concentrated on strengthening their position in core markets, MF was chasing growth opportunities everywhere. They built new factories in Turkey and Pakistan. They established assembly plants in Nigeria and Kenya. They created joint ventures in India and Indonesia, often with local partners who had little experience in manufacturing. Each new market required different products, different suppliers, and different distribution networks. The MF-35 that had been so successful was now available in 47 different configurations. The parts catalog had grown to thousands of pages. A dealer in Iowa might need to stock components for tractors built in 6 different countries, each with slightly different specifications. This complexity was crushing the company's profit margins. Manufacturing costs varied wildly between facilities. The Coventry plant paid British wages and dealt with strong unions. The Brazilian factory operated with lower labor costs but struggled with quality control. The Indian joint venture faced constant supply chain disruptions. In 1975, MF's operating profit margin was just 3.2%, compared to John Deere's 8.1%. Labor relations were deteriorating across the company's operations. The Coventry plant, which had been the pride of British manufacturing, was plagued by strikes and work slowdowns. Union demands for higher wages and better benefits were driving up costs faster than productivity improvements could offset them. A tractor that took 47 hours to build in 1965 required 73 hours by 1978. The company's financial structure was becoming increasingly dangerous. MF had borrowed heavily to fund their global expansion, and by 1978, total debt had reached $1.8 billion. Interest payments alone consumed $180 million annually, money that competitors were investing in new product development and manufacturing efficiency. Quality problems began emerging across the product line. The MF-2675, launched in 1976 as a premium 130 horsepower model, suffered from transmission failures that left tractors stranded in fields during critical harvest periods. The MF-1085, designed to compete directly with John Deere's popular 4430, had hydraulic problems that caused implements to drop unexpectedly, sometimes damaging crops. Customer loyalty, built over decades of reliable service, began eroding. Farmers who had bought Massey-Ferguson equipment for generations started looking at competitors. John Deere's reputation for reliability became legendary among farmers. Case IH offered more attractive financing packages. Even smaller companies like Ford and White were gaining market share by focusing on specific niches. The Iranian Revolution in 1979 delivered a devastating blow to MF's expansion plans. Massey-Ferguson had entered into joint ventures to assemble tractors in Iran, partnering with the Iran tractor manufacturing company ITMCO in Tabriz. By the late 1970s, ITMCO was producing up to 13,000 Massey-Ferguson tractors per year for the region. However, the upheaval of the revolution and subsequent political changes disrupted MF's operations and erased many future growth opportunities in the Middle East. Currency fluctuations added another layer of complexity. MF's global operations meant they were constantly exposed to exchange rate risks. When the British pound strengthened against the dollar, their UK-built tractors became less competitive in export markets. When the Brazilian real weakened, their South American profits disappeared when converted back to Canadian dollars. By 1980, Massey-Ferguson's global market share had fallen to 18%, down from 25% just 5 years earlier. In their home market of Canada, they held just 22% market share, down from 45% a decade earlier. The company that had once defined agricultural mechanization was losing ground in every major market. The collapse came with shocking speed. In October 1980, Massey-Ferguson reported a $225 million loss for the fiscal year, one of the largest Canadian corporate losses of that period. The company's stock price collapsed from $18 to $3 in 6 months. Banks began calling in loans and suppliers demanded cash on delivery. The global empire was crumbling. Conrad Black, the Canadian media mogul who controlled MF through his Argus Corporation, launched a desperate search for a buyer. He approached Ford Motor Company, offering them the entire agricultural division. Ford declined, citing MF's massive debt load. Case Corporation examined the books but walked away from the complexity of the global operations. Even Fiat, which had been expanding aggressively in agricultural equipment, decided the risks were too great. The financial details were staggering. MF owed $2.2 billion to 200 different banks worldwide. They had outstanding commitments to suppliers totaling another $800 million. Warranty obligations stretched into the hundreds of millions. The company was burning through $50 million in cash every month just to keep operations running. In 1981, the Canadian and Ontario governments, fearing the loss of a national industrial champion, backed a refinancing with about $200 million in loan guarantees. But that support came with harsh conditions. MF had to close plants, sell assets, and restructure operations under government oversight. The once formidable powerhouse was being systematically dismantled. In North America, MF shut its Detroit tractor assembly plant in 1982 and spun off its Brantford, Ontario combine operation as Massey Combines Corporation in 1986. Production there ceased in 1988. The Brazilian operations were sold to a local company for a fraction of their book value. In Australia, MF ended production at its Sunshine plant in Melbourne in 1986. The Banner Lane plant in Coventry, where tractors including the legendary MF-35 were made, continued operating through the 1980s. When AGCO acquired the MF tractor business in 1994, they kept production alive until the line stopped on Christmas Eve, 2002, having built more than 3 million tractors. At closure, approximately 1,000 jobs were lost, with production shifting to other AGCO facilities in France and Brazil. Entire product lines disappeared. The MF-1200 series, once the flagship of the company's high-horsepower offerings, was discontinued. The industrial equipment division was sold to Vickers. In 1986, what remained of Massey-Ferguson was reorganized as Verity Corporation, a name chosen specifically because it bore no resemblance to the original company. Verity tried to focus on core markets and profitable product lines, but it was too late. The brand had lost credibility with farmers who had been burned by parts shortages and warranty problems. Dealers were switching to other manufacturers who could guarantee long-term support. The sell-offs weren't just plants and product lines. Perkins remained under Verity until 1994 when it was sold to Lucas Industries. After Verity merged with Lucas in 1996 to form Lucas Verity, Perkins was sold to Caterpillar in 1998. The engineering talent that had made MF innovative scattered to competitors. Senior designers joined John Deere, Case, and Ford. The research and development capabilities that had produced breakthrough technologies were dismantled. The institutional knowledge built over more than a century was lost. The final blow came in 1993 when Verity's agricultural division reported losses of $150 million despite years of restructuring. The company's board, led by CEO Victor Rice, made the ultimate decision to exit the farm equipment business entirely. In 1994, AGCO acquired the Massey-Ferguson tractor business from Verity Corporation for about $329 million, significantly expanding its global reach and dealer network. AGCO, a company formed just 4 years earlier from the agricultural divisions of Deutz Alles and other struggling manufacturers, suddenly owned one of agriculture's most famous names. But they weren't buying a company. They were buying a brand, some factories, and a dealer network. The Massey-Ferguson that had employed 72,000 people and operated 37 factories was gone forever. Today, you can still buy a Massey-Ferguson tractor. The MF 8700 series, built in AGCO's factory in Beauvais, France, produces up to 400 horsepower and features GPS guidance, variable rate application, and automated steering systems that would have seemed like science fiction to the engineers who designed the original MF-35. But it's not really a Massey-Ferguson. The engine comes from AGCO Power, a Finnish subsidiary. The transmission is manufactured by ZF in Germany. The hydraulics are supplied by Bosch Rexroth. The electronics are designed in Georgia, and the cab is built in Italy. AGCO assembles these components and applies the familiar red paint and MF badge. But the soul of the original company, the engineering culture, the manufacturing expertise, the farmer-focused innovation, died in 1994.